a killer off the coast. Powerful Hurricane Matthew approaches the eastern shores of Florida.
You need to leave now. So if you're in an evacuation zone, get out.
Waters are rising. The wind is howling. The rain is coming down. 4 states order evacuations.
I live right by the water, so I'm leaving.
Streets and airports empty out. Shelters are filling up. As the storm that left more than 100 dead in the Caribbean approaches the southeastern United States, forecasters make a dire prediction.
This could be not only a very expensive hurricane, but a very deadly hurricane.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley, reporting tonight from West Palm Beach, Florida.
Well, as you can see, the southeast is threatened tonight by the most powerful hurricane in more than a decade. Matthew is about 100 miles offshore. It's expected to make landfall overnight just north of here on the Space Coast of Florida near Cape Canaveral. It is a huge hurricane, 120 miles wide, and it is strong. Sustained winds up to 140 miles an hour. More than 2 million coastal residents from Florida to the Carolinas have been ordered to evacuate. Nearly 3,000 are in shelters in Florida alone. President Obama has declared an emergency in Florida and now in South Carolina. The governor of Florida is warning of potentially catastrophic damage, flooding, and power losses for millions that could last for days. Airports shut down. Thousands of flights have been canceled. Even Disney World is shutting down. That fantasy world gives way to the reality of a very dangerous storm. Matthew has already killed a reported 140 people in the Caribbean, most of them in Haiti. Forecasters tell us the major threat to the U.S. is a storm surge of up to 11 feet that could bring flooding along 500 miles of the Atlantic coast. A short time ago, we checked the winds on the beach. This is the Atlantic shore here in Palm Beach. The winds at this point are blowing at about 39 miles an hour. That is tropical storm force. A little bit later this evening, it is forecast that these winds will be at 90 miles an hour or more. The sand is blowing up off the beach, and it's very difficult to stand here for that reason alone. We have a team of correspondents up and down the southeast coast. First, we're going to go to Manuel Bojorquez, just south of Fort Lauderdale.
Scott, here along Dania Beach, we are seeing dangerous surf, waves up to 10 feet tall, and bands of rain. Officials along this part of South Florida say this is now the time to hunker down and wait for Matthew to pass. The outer bands of Hurricane Matthew pounded South Florida this afternoon with gusty winds and torrential rain. Beaches were closed as the surf became dangerous. Ahead of the storm, business owners raced to board up windows. There were long lines again at gas stations, that is, until they ran out. Also empty, some store shelves. It was a last-minute rush for anyone who hadn't prepared for the storm. Robert McCall lives near Dania Beach and hopes these makeshift sandbags will protect his home from flooding. He's leaving after hearing the governor today.
When he said, "This will kill you," not "can kill you," it will kill you.
That was it.
That was it.
Time is running out. There are no excuses not to evacuate. Our #1 priority is to protect every life.
Governor Rick Scott repeatedly urged people to leave evacuation zones immediately.
We should not be putting people's lives at risk because you made the foolish decision not to evacuate.
Leaving was not an easy process for Gloria Dixon, who runs a group home for 15 residents with cerebral palsy and had to evacuate all of them.
We need this facility not to flood. This is their home. We don't need it to flood. We need things to remain intact.
Another concern as the hurricane churns up the coast is the threat of tornadoes. Florida's governor has activated 3,500 National Guard troops to assist with rescues and recovery.
I'm Mark Strassman in Daytona Beach. Local officials worry the predicted 9-foot storm surge could collapse the Main Street Pier. At sunset, 4 bridges to this barrier island will close to arriving traffic. Most of the 20,000 residents here have left, but not all.
You guys going to hang out, or are you guys going to evacuate?
Michael Chitwood, the Daytona Beach police chief, worries about the holdouts.
And what would you call those people?
You're a fool, because this hurricane is unlike any other hurricane we've seen.
By Chitwood's definition, Steve and Judy Lampy are fools. They'll ride out Matthew at home and hope sandbags and aluminum storm shutters will protect them.
The weather's getting worse.
I know.
Any second thoughts?
Once the bridge closes, it's scary. You know, at 6.
Because then you're
stuck.
3 blocks away, Les Thompson decided this morning that staying was foolish. He and his wife Chris will head inland to Orlando to stay with their son.
The reality is I don't think we've ever gone through anything like this, certainly once in a lifetime.
Once the bridges close, holdouts will still be allowed to drive off the island, but no one may drive on. Those holdouts have been warned if they call 911 after storm conditions get too dangerous, emergency teams will not respond.
I'm Omar Villafranca on Exuma Island in the Bahamas. Hurricane Matthew tore through this part of the Caribbean last night. The wind and storm surge was so powerful, boats were smashed onto the shore. Hurricane winds over 140 miles per hour ripped the roof off this house in the Bahamas. We felt the wrath of Matthew as the storm hit overnight in Exuma. Beaches are empty, homes are boarded up, and here on Exuma Island, most of the people are without electricity. In Haiti, the death toll is over 100 and rising, 2 days after the hurricane hit the island nation as a Category 4. In Jeremy, 145-mile-per-hour winds decimated homes, while floodwaters swept away roads and bridges. The widespread damage prompted the Haitian government to suspend Sunday's presidential election. Back in the Bahamas, crews immediately started clearing debris from the roads at daylight. Magnolia Morley rode out the storm in the motel she manages.
We figured that we're blessed that the eye passed to the south of us, and we did not get more intense conditions than we did.
Cleaning up the debris will take several days. Thousands of people in the Bahamas are still without power, but many know the storm could have been much worse. Omar Villafranca, CBS News, Exuma Island, the Bahamas.
Now let's go to Eric Fisher, chief meteorologist at our Boston station, WBZ. Eric, where's this headed?
Well, Scott, unfortunately, we have spent the day watching Matthew regain strength yet again. It is back to a Category 4 hurricane. You can see those spiral bands as it moves through the Bahamas and starts to make its trek toward the state of Florida. The inner eye wall right over Freeport on Grand Bahama. Some very destructive winds expected there, and it will start to make its way toward the coast of Florida as we head into the overnight hours. So hurricane warnings are up from just north of Miami all the way up the coastline. That's a big factor in this storm, the fact that they go all the way up through the coast of South Carolina. And here's a look at the timeline. You see that center as it works its way toward the coast. It may move right along it, just off or just on, but the bottom line is the same. Very destructive winds moving ashore, and since we have these powerful winds, a big storm surge. If you're in an evacuation zone, heed those warnings. Wind is one thing. It is destructive in its own right, but storm surge is the #1 killer. They're looking out for your safety. Listen to those warnings. Storm continues to track right along the coast as it heads up through South and North Carolina, inundating it with very heavy rainfall, and that's one thing to watch as we head toward the weekend. Parts of eastern South and North Carolina have had 10 to 15 inches of rain in the past month. When you add this much rain on top of it, Scott, we could have a very significant flood event unfolding this weekend.
Eric Fisher, WBZ. Eric, thanks very much. Most everything we know about Hurricane Matthew comes from the forecasters at the National Hurricane Center in Miami. Earlier today, we spoke to the director, meteorologist Rick Knabb.
I can't remember a hurricane on a track like this.
I cannot either, one that has already impacted Haiti and eastern Cuba and is impacting the Bahamas, so many different land areas.
It seems, though, with this track right up the coastline, that if the eye of the storm moves a little bit west, you could take in millions more people very easily.
Well, slight differences in the track of the hurricane could make a huge difference in terms of the magnitude of the impacts for particular locations. Even if the center of circulation stays just offshore, it's easy for the hurricane to bring hurricane-force winds onto the coast, even bring strong winds well inland. Every hurricane has its own DNA, its own characteristics. Matthew's going to write its own story, and I think folks in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina could end up experiencing wind, water, or both.
What kills most people in a hurricane?
We know that historically, last several decades, with landfalling U.S. tropical systems, 9 out of 10 people who have died as a result of water. The wind can be damaging and deadly too. All the hazards are in play, an extremely dangerous situation.
You have enormous experience and history at this, but I wonder, is there anything about this storm that has surprised you?
What has surprised me is how the scenario has set up such that so many people are in harm's way. And it's amazing how sometimes hurricanes seek out the worst possible paths in many ways and affect so many people. But that's the reality we're faced with. There's no denying it now. This is a serious threat to several states, Florida up through Georgia and South Carolina. The time is now to act. You don't want to just hope the problem away.
Dr. Rick Knabb, the director of the National Hurricane Center. Up the Atlantic coast, folks who live in Georgia and South Carolina are clearing out of Matthew's path. Errol Barnett is on the island.
The hunters have called this coastal Georgia community home for 40 years, but today they're leaving it all behind. The Waters family is doing the same.
I grabbed the boys' baby books. I grabbed a wedding album that a girlfriend of mine made us, and a couple important papers, and we're out of here.
Fearing a storm surge of 10 to 12 feet, 15 inches of rain and hurricane-force winds, Georgia joined South Carolina today in ordering mandatory evacuations for people on the coast. It also reversed 125 miles of eastbound lanes on Interstate 16 to accommodate those leaving. South Carolina did the same on I-26 as businesses in Charleston boarded up. Both states have deployed the National Guard and opened shelters for those with nowhere to run. We caught up with the mayor of Tybee Island, Jason Bilterman, just before he evacuated.
You can replace your home, you can replace community buildings, but you cannot replace a human life.
The mayor fears the shallow coastal shelf behind me could spell disaster if Matthew pushes up a sizable storm surge as it is expected to do. He also tells me the last time a hurricane followed this exact track and gained strength, Scott, it obliterated this entire island.
Errol Barnett, thanks. Well, the world's largest cruise ship ports are closed. Some of those ships are riding out the storm at sea. And major airports in Florida, of course, have shut down. Here's our transportation correspondent, Chris Van Cleve.
The last flight out of Fort Lauderdale left mid-afternoon, leaving workers little time to make final preparations for the looming storm. In West Palm Beach, the check-in kiosks were wrapped in plastic. Judy Balin managed to get a flight to Washington today.
We were the last flight out. We were desperate, but we were the last flight out.
Airports in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and Orlando are all essentially closing, and others could be affected as the storm moves north. More than 3,785 flights through Saturday have already been canceled. George Hobicka tracks the airline industry.
Not only do they not want the planes to be stuck in the path of the storm, but they don't want them to be damaged. There are instances where planes actually get tipped over in a very strong wind, so they're going to be moving the planes to a safe harbor.
Amtrak has also halted service in the southeast through at least Saturday. In Orlando, Disney World will be closed at least through Friday, just the fourth shutdown in the park's history.
The airlines are offering waivers so you can make changes or get a refund without having to pay a fee. Scott, the airlines are hoping to slowly begin service as early as tomorrow afternoon, but it could take a couple of days to get things back to normal. And of course, all of that depends on what kind of damage Matthew brings.
Chris Van Cleve, thanks. Our team will be back with the latest on the hurricane later in the broadcast, but right now let's go to Anthony Mason in New York with more of the day's news. Anthony?
Thanks, Scott. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, how fast that New Jersey commuter train was going before it crashed last week. And up next, the presidential candidates prepare for a Sunday showdown. Just 33 days now to the election, 3 days to the next debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This one will be town meeting style, with the candidates taking questions from both the audience and the moderators in St. Louis, Missouri. Here's Major Garrett.
After returning from a Western campaign swing, Donald Trump spent part of Thursday prepping for Sunday's second presidential debate as he tries to write a listing campaign. Polls this week show Hillary Clinton ahead in battleground states by 5 points in Florida, 4 points in Pennsylvania, 3 points in North Carolina, and 11 points in Colorado. The race has tightened in Ohio, but Trump trails in Michigan, another Midwest state he hoped to make competitive. Complicating matters, a letter signed by 30 former Republican members of Congress that branded the GOP nominee manifestly unqualified to be president and urged other Republicans not to vote for this man, whose disgraceful candidacy is indefensible. The former lawmakers criticized Trump's call for a temporary ban on Muslim immigration, something running mate Mike Pence said today no longer applies.
Well, because it's not Donald Trump's position now.
The Trump-Pence website still shows the press release announcing the proposed ban. While Clinton also focused on debate prep, her running mate Tim Kaine tried to make the best of mixed reviews of his debate performance by needling Pence for sidestepping many incendiary Trump positions.
I think there's a level of desperation in the Trump campaign right now.
Clinton's camp had to sidestep an embarrassment of its own, reversing a recent move to increase campaign ads on the Weather Channel. On Twitter, RNC Chairman Reince Priebus said Clinton was exploiting Hurricane Matthew for political gain and urged her to apologize. Trump is here in New Hampshire for what amounts to a tune-up town hall in advance of Sunday's showdown with Clinton. Anthony, on Saturday, Trump will be in Wisconsin at an event in the congressional district of House Speaker Paul Ryan. But it is unclear if Ryan, the host of the event, and Trump will even appear together.
Major Garrett, thanks, Major. CBS News will bring you live coverage of the Clinton-Trump town meeting debate Sunday evening at 9 Eastern Time. Next, the final seconds before a deadly train crash. Today, the National Transportation Safety Board said a New Jersey transit train accelerated to twice the speed limit, 21 miles an hour, just before it crashed in Hoboken a week ago. A data recorder shows the engineer applied the emergency brake less than a second before impact. The crash killed one person and injured more than 100. It's hard for us here at CBS News to believe, but it's been 10 years since cameraman Paul Douglas and soundman James Brolin were killed by a roadside bomb in Baghdad. Senior foreign correspondent Mark Phillips shared his thoughts at a memorial service today in London.
10 years, eh? If, to coin a phrase, a week is a long time in politics, what's 10 years in the news business? As far as Paul and James are concerned, 10 years seems like no time at all. Judging from our conversations, everybody's approach to this commemoration seems to be similar. Has it really been 10 years? It seems like yesterday or last week. The shock was so deep and the loss so great that no amount of time can really diminish it.
10 years ago, we promised we would never forget Paul Douglas and James Brolin. Tonight, we renew that vow. More about the hurricane in a moment.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Voya Financial, changing the way you think of retirement.
Back now in West Palm Beach, Florida. This is the cafeteria of Forest Hill High School, one of nearly 50 shelters set up by the Red Cross to accept about 3,000 people who have answered the governor's call to evacuate. Who are these people?
These are people who have been displaced, essentially. They were either at mobile homes or at vulnerable places. They're heeding the call from the authorities.
Roberto Baltodano has volunteered for the Red Cross since 1992.
It's the most important thing that we can do is the peace of mind of knowing they're not alone.
Never came.
Migbalia Espinina came with her 12-year-old daughter, Jasraya. Jasraya told us that she brought the things she needed the most. Top of her list, her homework. Omar Mazarigos came with his brother, sister, mom, and dad.
We live really close to the evacuation zones and to the shore, so we just wanted to come to a little bit more of a safer spot.
And we couldn't help but notice Angelina Velasquez with her little boy, George. He's 6 days old.
How did you start? Because the Red Cross helped me once. August 24th, 1992, Hurricane Andrew. It fed us for 17 days, and so I came to know what the Red Cross does.
And you've been volunteering ever since?
Ever since.
We asked one man in the shelter if he feared losing his home. He told us, "If I have my life, I am rich." And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. For the latest on the storm, go to our streaming news service, CBSN. We'll have a complete wrap-up of the overnight events on CBS This Morning tomorrow. For our team in Florida and all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.